There's a word for people who take pleasure in the suffering of others: sadist. And sadists should never be allowed anywhere near our politics. Almost the entire media reported a scripted comment by Suella Braverman. She talked about Guardian reading, tofu eating, wokerati, and this was considered to be quite daring and funny. But almost none of them reported what she was doing when she said it. What she was doing was pushing through the House of Commons the most repressive legislation of the modern era. And she seemed to do it gleefully. She revelled in it. She enjoyed it. She grinned all the way through it. The Public Order Bill is the tool of dictators. It's the definitive termination of our rights to protest. Perhaps the most sinister aspect of the bill is what it calls serious disruption prevention orders. These are orders that can be served on anyone who has been to a protest in the past 5 years, or encouraged anyone else to go to a protest in the past 5 years, or in any way has supported a protest in the previous 5 years. You can be subjected to the kind of restraints that dangerous criminals might face when they're released from prison on probation. You have to report to the police as and when the police determine. You're not allowed to associate with certain other people. You are not allowed to go to a protest or encourage a protest or possibly even look at protest-related materials online. And you can be forced to wear an electronic tag and have monitoring equipment installed in your home. I've seen some people say, well, they can't do it to everyone. I mean, if millions of us protest, they won't have the resources to force us all to wear electronic tags. But that's not how this works. The way it works is that they do it to the specific people they want to target, to their political enemies, to those they want to scapegoat, to those they want in particular to discourage. And that is how it always begins. UK politicians love to lecture other nations about democracy. They say, you should practice good governance. You should be like us. But they really, really shouldn't be like us. We're a terrible model of democracy. We have a prominent whistleblower and journalist, Julian Assange, thrown into effectively a dungeon in Belmarsh prison, just being left there to rot for the crime of exposing the misdeeds of the powerful. And now we have these extremely oppressive forms of legislation. The police can now arrest anyone who protests. The government says, oh, no, we're not shutting down protests, just protests which causes serious disruption to 2 or more people or to an organisation. That's what we're prosecuting. But the Police Act, passed earlier this year, has redefined serious disruption so that it now includes noise. So any protest deemed to be causing a noise is causing serious disruption to 2 or more people or to an organisation. In other words, any protest. But of course, Labour's going to repeal all these repressive laws, isn't it? It's a party which grew out of the Labour movement, which was all about protest. No. Keir Starmer has made just one public statement related to the Public Order Bill, and he has endorsed its headline policy of raising the penalties for people who block roads. That's a year in prison, twice the penalty for common assault. And while Labour voted against it in the House of Commons, there is no prospect I can see that under Keir Starmer, former Director of Public Prosecutions, these laws will be repealed. In fact, in the previous incarnation of right-wing Labour, under Blair and Brown, we saw a series of highly repressive new laws brought in. Prevention of Harassment Act, 2000 Terrorism Act, 2005 Serious Crime Act, which gravely eroded our rights to protest. The fact that these new acts brought in by a Conservative government finish off that process and terminate our right to protest, I don't think will cause Keir Starmer a single missed minute of sleep. When you look at it from this perspective, when you see the Conservatives and the Labour Party both broadly supporting highly repressive, draconian legislation, you see the extent to which the faces may change, but the fundamental policies do not. There is an elite consensus around deregulating business and re-regulating citizens. And what that means is basically preventing citizens from getting in the way of capital. And it's particularly telling that these new highly repressive laws are aimed at environmental campaigners, the people who question the very model of economic growth, the people who point out that business as usual is destroying the living world. And as such, they must be caged and corralled and contained and prevented from interfering in the extraction of profit from the country by capital. It's easy for people to say, well, that doesn't apply to me because I don't protest. I'm a respectable citizen. I'm not one of those people who goes and sits in the road. But the most respectable citizens of all are the protesters, because they're the ones who have secured all our freedoms. I couldn't be talking to you like I'm talking right now if it weren't for the protests of our ancestors. I wouldn't have a vote. You wouldn't have a vote. We wouldn't even have a weekend if it weren't for the protests of our ancestors. Protest is the bedrock of democracy. It's what secures our freedoms. Good citizenship is hand in glove with protest. You cannot separate the two things. So when people say, well, they're not doing it to me yet. Oh, yes, they are. They're undermining your fundamental rights and freedoms, even if you never intend to protest yourself, because it is protesters who secure those fundamental rights and freedoms. Protest is the bedrock of democracy. Obviously, these new laws are terrifying, but that doesn't mean we should be terrified. It does not mean we should be cowed into submission. If you look at what our ancestors faced, the people who mobilised for the male franchise and were cut down in Manchester in the Peterloo massacre, the people who mobilised for votes for women, the suffragettes, who were treated with appalling violence by the state, the civil rights campaigners with the utterly brutal treatment they faced, all the people who have fought for freedom down the ages, many of them faced even greater barriers than those we now face. Many of them literally put their lives on the line, and yet they still fought for freedom. They fought for something bigger than themselves. And unless we do the same, despite these laws, even because of these laws, then we will be betraying those who fought for us. Once the Public Order Bill becomes law, even a film like this could be deemed to offend it because I'm inciting protest. Maybe I'll end up with an electronic tag myself. But regardless of that, we'll keep making these videos, but please keep funding us by becoming a member and subscribing on Patreon.